What is a realistic expectation for the Mariners payroll this winter? We'll answer that and more coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Monday, September 23rd, 2024. This is Tidy Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, we'll be opening up the mailbag like we do here every single Monday and answer some of your Mariners questions. But before we do that, shout out to our title sponsor today, Booking.com, Booking.com. Yeah, the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball, and get the Booking.com app today. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description, and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. All right, let's kick off Mailbag Monday here with a question from CJ, who wants to know, what do you think ownership is likely going to do with payroll in the offseason? Expand, retract, or stay right where they are except added arbitration pay? I know what we all want, but what's your gut feeling? So, CJ, this is a pretty lengthy discussion that we're going to have here. It's a multi-layered discussion here. And before we actually answer your question directly, we kind of have to see where the Mariners just are in general, right? So, Colby, where are the Mariners at before heading into arbitration?
Right. So the Mariners right now have 7 players under guaranteed contracts for 2025. Those 7 players are going to account for roughly $95 million in payroll. They have 8 players who will be making the league minimum, who are currently on the 28-man roster. They are going to be making roughly $6 million, $6 to $7 million. Some will make a little bit more than the league minimum because of performance incentives and all that stuff, but they're all going to be making less than, they're all going to be making less than $1 million this upcoming year. And so before we get into the 12 arbitration players that the Mariners have, they're at about 100 million, somewhere between 100 to 103-ish million dollars. We'll just go with 100 since it's a nice round number. And then obviously, players on the 40-man, they're making the minimum salary too. And so there's going to be, I don't know how many extra players on the minimum, but we can safely assume that there's going to be at least probably another $10 million just filling out the back end of your 40-man. So I think a real safe place to put it is that they're at about 110. Now that's if Mitch Haniger opts into a $17 million player option, which he's going to do. And that's assuming that the Mariners opt out Polanco's $12 million option, which I think at this point is safe to assume as well. So I think overall, with the 40-man and all that, I think the 40-man payroll as they enter this winter before arbitration is at about 110 million would be my guesstimate.
So that's already a pretty significant chunk of what their payroll was this year. Spot Track has them at $147.6 million in 2024 payroll. So 110, that's a lot, right? You got $37-ish million left before you reach where you were at this year, essentially. So now let's go down the list of arbitration eligible players. Which guys do we think they're actually going to tender a contract to, and how much are those guys going to cost?
Yeah, so the arbitration eligible players are Josh Rojas, Sam Haggerty, Randy Arozarena, Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, Jackson Coar, Austin Vogt, Trent Thornton, Matt Brash, Taylor Saucedo, JT Chargois, and Josh Fleming, who I don't even know if he's still on the roster or not.
Sure.
But he's not on the 40-man, so we'll toss Fleming off the list here for now.
Sure.
So Rojas is probably going to make between $5 to $6 million next year. I think that's a pretty easy non-tender. If you can get him back here for $2 million, fine, whatever. But 5 or 6 is a lot for a guy who is just not an everyday player. You already have that guy on your roster and you're making a lot less. So Rojas is probably out. I think Haggerty coming off the Achilles injury, he's probably not getting. He'll probably only make about $1 million in arbitration, but it's probably a guy that I could see them wanting to bring back as a non-roster invitee on a minor league deal. I think they'd be interested in bringing Haggerty back. So you might see him in spring training, but it's not going to be with a major league contract. Coar, same thing, injury related. Trent Thornton probably only going to make about $2.5 million at most, maybe $3 million. But again, trying to skim some money here. Thornton, Saucedo, probably only going to make about like $1.2 million. He's on the borderline whether or not you want to bring him back. So start looking at guys who are likely to get tendered. Randy Arozarena, probably going to make about $12 million next year in arbitration, give or take. Logan Gilbert is super too, so he is in his second year of ARB. He made $4 million this year, probably looking at about $8-ish million, 6 to 8, somewhere in that range. George Kirby, I think's pretty clear. Just he's also super too, very similar career to Logan Gilbert at this stage, so he's probably going to get around $4 million as well. So just those 2 guys alone, or those 3 guys alone, right there is about $25 million for those 3 guys, and that takes you very close to what you're already at. Both is an interesting one. He's probably going to make about $1.5 million, $2 million, assuming there's not a in his contract makes him ineligible for arbitration. Sometimes that gets thrown in, but Voth has been really good, so you might want to bring him back. Matt Brash, because he didn't pitch this year, he's kind of an interesting ARB case. It might be about $2 million. You're probably going to want to bring him back anyways. And then JT Shaw is probably going to be about $2 million. So I think when you add up all these ARB guys who are almost certainly getting tendered a contract, you're looking at 12, 20, 24, 26, about $30 million between these ARB guys. And that would bring you up to about 140 to 145, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
And again, these are ARB guesses. These aren't with any kind of certainty whatsoever. So it might be a little more, a little less. So I think saying you're going to be in that 140 to 145 range for your 40-man entering the winter is a pretty reasonable assumption.
We'll get our projections from MLB Trade Rumors here in about, a month, I think?
I think they usually come out like a couple days after the regular season ends, so it might be a week or so.
Oh, okay, so it might be in a week. So we'll go over those, and usually those are very accurate. They historically have been pretty much on the money.
Yeah, they're usually within about 10% either direction.
Yeah. All right, so let's just say that our projections are right, though, for the sake of this exercise, right? I agree with all the guys that you said they would tender and non-tender. So let's call it 140 to 145. Again, they're at 147 this year. So, I mean, they have to increase at least a little bit, right? You would think. Right.
Well, the thing they could try to do, first of all, let's look at it. From 2021 to 2022, they increased their payroll about $23 million that year. Then from 2022 to 2023, they increased it by about $20 million. Unfortunately, this last year, the total increase heading into opening day was just over $3 million. And with the in-season additions, it ends up being an increase of just about $11 million. They've gone from 23rd to 21st to 18th in payroll. This year, they're going to be about 17, 16. So if they follow on that track, it's an increase of, it's basically stay the same or $20 million, like somewhere in that range, which would push them up to about, 165-ish. But they don't have any revenue this year from playoff games. We don't know what the TV money looks like or anything like that. We don't know season tickets. We can be rest assured, though, that ownership will pretend like they just don't have the money to spare because they didn't make the postseason because they spent some extra money in the whatever. So my assumption is that Jerry Dipoto will be told that payroll will increase. And that is the line that Jerry will use to the media when he talks to them after the season. But my assumption would be is that increase is probably going to be less than $20 million. That is what I would assume. Obviously, our hope is that they look at that and they go, hey, screw it. Like, here's $40 million. Go spend 185. Go get back up to where we were when, 2017, 2018, when we had all these veterans and we were trying to win or whatever. Like, go get up to that 180 mark, right? Which is the bare minimum. I mean, again, where the Mariners should be is they are in the 12th-ish biggest media market. They should have the 12th highest payroll, roughly, which is right now about $190 million.
Yeah. So back in 2018, which is the peak of their payroll over, under John Stanton, and Chris Larson and that ownership group. So they were at 160. That they finished 10th that year in payroll, right? 10th now in 2024 belongs to the Giants at $206.5 million.
Right. Yeah, the Mariners should be operating in the range of, even if you want to be generous to them, to this ownership group, they should be operating at around $180 million minimum in these years where they have a real shot to like win the division and make playoff runs. They should be operating at 180 minimum, but it should really be closer to 2 million or 200 million considering where they rank in market size.
Yeah.
So do I think they're going to get there? No, not even close. I don't think they're going to try. My best guess is that the Mariners the front office is going to be given a 40-man budget of about $160 million. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
Which is only $13 million more than what you have right now on the books.
So 12th this year belongs to the St. Louis Cardinals at $175.9 million. So we'll call it 176, right? Mm-hmm. So to be in line with your market, you have to spend at least $176 million on your ball club.
Yeah. My guess they come about $20 million short of that would be my guess.
So my expectation here to answer your question after all this discussion, CJ, is that I think there will be a slight increase because they just have to. But it's an increase that's going to be small enough where they're still going to have to probably trade Luis Castillo or Mitch Garver or Mitch Haniger or maybe all three or at least two of the three to create more flexibility for themselves.
Right. It's kind of setting up like they're going to have to make some Eugenio Suarez or Jared Kelenic, Marco Gonzalez, another at least one of those trades. Kind of the issue with that this winter will be though, like, okay, who's making enough money that's significant enough? And it's Luis Castillo who has a no trade clause. You're not getting anything for Garver. You're not getting anything for Haniger unless you're taking on similar salary back. So you're probably not going to save much there. So yeah, there's just not a JP Crawford at $11 million. Okay, go find a shortstop this winter. Like, what I mean? So it'll be harder for them to do that this winter than it was last winter, is my point.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've had a very lengthy discussion about the Luis Castillo situation and how that could potentially help you do two things at once and shed some payroll and also maybe address a need, maybe even two on the major league roster. So, if you want to hear about that, if you're curious about that, I forget specifically the episode. I'll look here in between segments and let you know which episode it was that we talked about that, and you can go back and listen to it. But for now, we are going to answer more of your questions in just a moment. First, though, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Booking.com and FanDuel. Explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival city during the postseason. Even an Orioles fan or a Guardians fan can have a good time in New York no matter what happens on the diamond this October. You can drown your playoff woes with a New York slice or celebrate advancing to the next round with a delicious chopped cheese, all while taking in the autumn vibes in Manhattan and capping it all off with a great stay in the city. Booking.com delivers exactly the right U.S. stay for you, and the right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, booking.yeah. NFL fans can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. Yeah, you heard that right. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. You can catch all the action between the M's and the Astros tonight on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. So CJ, who of course asked us our question here that we talked about in the first segment about payroll. If you haven't heard our discussion about Luis Castillo, and anyone else that might be curious about this as well, and the possibility of trading him and addressing a need and also shedding some payroll in the process, all of that good stuff. We did that about, it says 9 days ago here in an episode titled, Could the Mariners Trade Luis Castillo and JP Crawford this offseason? So if you haven't heard that discussion yet, you can go over to that episode and check it out. I'll also link it in the description of this episode. All right, let's get into the rest of your questions here. Deep Hanky wants to know, JP this season, home versus left-handed pitching, 139 WRC plus. Away versus left-handed pitching, 154 WRC plus. Away versus right-handed pitching, 125 WRC plus. Home versus right-handed pitching, 19 WRC plus. One is not like the others. Thoughts on struggles versus right-handed pitching at home, selling out for power, batter's eye? I don't have an answer for you, right? Because this is new. This is very, very new. He has never struggled this much against righties, specifically at home, really anywhere, but specifically at home, he has never struggled this much against righties. 2022, he had a 93 WRC plus. That's the worst of his recent years, right? Since he essentially became a starter in Seattle full time, right? So 19 is baffling. And I don't think it's as simple as like, oh, it's the batter's eye or whatever, because the batter's eye was the same last year. It was the same the year before that, and he was fine.
Right. He's also been fine against lefties at home.
Yeah.
So I'd like to, first of all, I don't even know if JP's aware of these numbers. I'm sure he's aware of, like, it's been tough. Like, I'm sure, they're hitters. They get it. They may not know the specific numbers, but yeah, he would tell you, yeah, it's been a real struggle at home is probably what he feels. But yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I am a little tired of the batter's eye just getting the blame for everything automatically when we don't know that that's.
And I think they're going to change it, so we'll find out.
Right. So like they're going to change it. So at the very least, if you're like a batter's eye is the biggest issue with the Mariners, well then I guess they're winning the World Series next year. But it's to me it's a convenient excuse. I'd like to know what JP's excuse for it is. It's with the difference that's stark, right? It's kind of. Is it just like monumental bad luck? What's interesting is we knew last year was an outlier, right? He wasn't going to put up a 138 WRC plus or whatever again. So what's interesting about this year is now you get to look at this and be like, okay, is this an outlier too? Like, is this an outlier on the extreme end? Because JP Crawford, even when he's been not the all-star he was last year, Crawford has been a league average bat pretty much his entire career, right around 100. And this year he's not been that or anything really all that close to it for any consistent stretch of time. So, is this year just an outlier year in the opposite direction? So I don't know. Is it fair to expect JP to return to some kind of normalcy, some kind of normal level next year? It might be. It might also be, a devastating mistake to just assume that JP Crawford is going to return to anything he used to be. So yeah, JP is such an enigma. He's such an interesting dude that it's very, very difficult to really pinpoint struggles this year, why he exploded last year, and what version of JP Crawford you should expect next year.
Marley Corn wants to know how many relievers on this roster will be back next season. It's an interesting question.
This roster, like this 28 man.
Yeah.
Taylor, Munoz. Both.
Is Munoz back?
Probably.
Is that a way that they potentially address a need this offseason?
Could be, but he's only making $3 million, so You're not addressing a payroll need. It would have to be all about the player you acquire back.
Yeah.
And Munoz is not a guy you should attach to a Garver or
No.
you're not doing another Edwin Diaz trade. You're far past that. Although the Diaz trade honestly was Diaz for Dunn and Kelnick, and then the Cano part of that actually didn't lower the value at all. You just had to take on some other contracts to make that work, but whatever, right? You understand you're not attaching Munoz to Garver to get him off your books.
Yeah.
I would say right now I bet pretty heavily that Munoz is back. Taylor's going to be back. I think another guy you could trade.
It's possible.
Yeah. The safe bet here is that none of these guys are coming back because it's a bullpen, and you trade bullpen guys willy-nilly. If you can get somebody you think is a viable, starting pitcher or like a viable everyday player, you trade a bullpen guy for that guy pretty much every time. But based on who's on the roster right now, I would say Snyder, Munoz, Voth. Throw that out there. And then Taylor, that would be my guess on the 4. And then obviously Santos, but he's not on the roster right now.
Yeah. Santos, Brash eventually.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to answer more of your questions here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, run your game. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Once again, you can catch all the action between the Mariners and the Astros tonight on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. All right, we got a couple of questions remaining here on Mailbag Monday. This one comes from Bryce, who wants to know, curious if y'all think Luke Raley is a viable option as the primary first baseman in 2025, and what scenario would have to play out for that to be acceptable? One, yes, I do think that Luke Raley can be a viable option to be the first baseman in 2025. Two, the scenario in which that would be acceptable, as you said, involves the Mariners going out and signing or trading for another outfielder.
But like if, for example, right, if the guy you're talking about is Max Kepler and Luke Raley's your first baseman, and I'm a Kepler guy, but he's just not like a big hitter that, makes up for. I mean, it really comes down to, do you think Luke Raley has like the power? Because we know he's not going to hit lefties, right? We feel pretty good about that. He's not going to hit lefties with any regularity. So you kind of have a platoon first base situation there. Mm-hmm. So in order to counteract that, don't you kind of need the outfielder you acquire who's also going to DH to be kind of a plus bat? So to me, it's like either you go get like Christian Walker and he's the first baseman and Raley is the outfield addition, so to speak.
Sure.
And if you're not going to do that and you want Raley to be the first baseman, fine. I think you got to go get like Santander. Like you got to pack some real thunder with your outfield addition. I think fair. That's what makes it okay.
Santander, does Tyler O'Neill fit in that category as well?
It's tough to trust to stay healthy. And obviously the strikeouts are a big thing. Right. But in that scenario, Randy Arozarena is basically your full-time DH at that point because, O'Neill's still a good defender. I think it's like Santander. Like you can make it. It could be Kepler, but if it's going to be like a not a soft, but like just a solid hitting outfielder, then I think all of a sudden the condition shifts to, well, what are you throwing out there at third base? Because I don't think like Raley, Kepler, and like
you need to add more slug.
I don't think that it can be like Raley, Kepler, and then you're just rolling back Rojas at third base. Like to me, that's a missed opportunity because I would just rather put Raley in the outfield and go get a power hitting first baseman. He really can hit for power, but it's just, he's probably going to hit for 20, 25 home runs instead of 30, 35 because he's just not going to contribute much against lefties. So he's only going to get 450 plate appearances as opposed to the 600.
Right. And then, when you're going up against lefties, I mean, Dylan Moore, Donovan Solano.
I mean, he can really only play first base, but sure. I mean, I will just keep hammering home Donovan Solano, the guy who's going to get 150 plate appearances. You know what's going to happen? He's going to sign with Seattle finally, and then he's going to suck. Like, the cliff will finally come.
Yeah, he's the guy that's hit like 280 consistently for like the last 6 years is going to come to Seattle. And he's going to hit like 210.
He's going to AJ Pollock it.
Yeah, I mean, Donovan Solano, all he does is hit. Like, since 2019, right? Here's his batting average.
We're not turning this into a Donovan Solano.
Hold on, just listen. 330, 326, 280, 284, 282, 287 this year.
I hear a guy in the decline. Went from 330 to 287.
He went from 282 last year to 287 this year. So actually,
he's not really getting better. He's plateauing.
And his slugging went up. His slugging went up from 391.
San Diego.
His slugging went up from 391 to 414. BSU Hawk wants to know
211 for us next year. Awesome.
BSU Hawk wants to know, does Laz have a shot at making the opening day roster? How about Harry Ford? Trying to think through how we can fill the DH spot given we won't have any money to spend. This kind of goes hand in hand with the conversation that we just had. No, you're probably going to rotate guys to the DH. I had someone ask me this over the weekend, actually, what are the Mariners going to do at DH? And basically my answer was, I don't expect them to go into this offseason like how they went into the last offseason where they were targeting Jorge Soler and they ended up signing Mitch Garver. And it was basically like, yeah, we're open at least. Maybe it was just straight up, we want a full-time DH, but at the very least they were open to having a full-time DH and they ended up with one. I don't think they're going to go into this offseason with that kind of approach again. Because especially with the outfield situation and the fact that Luke Rayleigh can play in the outfield and first base as well, they have some flexibility in that regard. And I think they're going to end up in a spot where they're probably just rotating everyone through there. So no, Laz Montes isn't going to be on the roster. Not even close. Like, he's not going to be on the roster at any point in 2025.
Laz Montes took about a month to figure out how to hit high A pitching.
Yeah.
There's a 0% chance he's making the leap from high A straight to the big leagues. Not happening. I'd be a little bit surprised if he started next year in double A. I think he's probably going back to high A for at least a little while. So no shot there. Harry Ford, maybe, but both of these guys have to survive the offseason, not getting traded, which is not a for sure thing. But Ford, he's going to get on base. Defensively, he's fine. He's fine as a catcher. Like, he's not going to kill you at the very least. Is he going to hit for any power? Does he have the hit tool, like the actual batting average tool to handle big league pitching straight out of double A? No. And I think the fact that he didn't make the jump to triple A at any point this year kind of tells you where the Mariners feel like Harry Ford is. So I think he'll get more of a look this upcoming spring, assuming he's still here. I think he'll get more of a look. I think he'll probably start next year in AAA, would be my guess. But I would say Ford has a better chance than Laz, but I would be pretty shocked if he is the opening day backup catcher, because that's the other thing too. How much playing time can you get this guy if Cal Raleigh is the primary catcher, right? Wouldn't you rather, if you still think he can catch and you still think he has value as a catcher, you kind of want him to do it a little bit, right? And
Sure.
If he's only going to do it once a week at the major league level, doesn't make a lot of sense. Go send him down to Tacoma, where he could do it 2, 3, 4 times a week and still get at bats at DH and maybe some left field like they've done in Arkansas this year. So no, neither of those guys are going to start the year on the opening day roster. Any of your farm hands are going to make the opening day roster out of spring training next year. It'll be Cole Young.
Yeah. Ford still has some growing to do. All right. That is going to do it for our show. But before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Tiding Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Tiding Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.